if there would be a solution such as celibacy for the mind, I think many people would try this option, just take this, put it somewhere. So I
Fun.
feel celibacy and monastic life is just an answer in a way to respond.
Action!
Welcome to the Spirit of Yoga. We are Kirsten
And Devdas.
from the Akasha Yoga Academy. In today's podcast, we hop into a kind of controversial topic of bringing yogi life and parenthood together. And that's an exploration of the traditions, but also a very practical exploration of our own life's experience. Controversial, I say controversial, or it seems to be a contradiction in many heads, I
Yeah.
would say,
Yeah.
presently and in the past as well. Where does that come from? Like, what's the root cause of that? It seems to be not going together, family life,
Yeah.
children, relationships, and the full dedication to awakening.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful question. It's so profoundly and deeply rooted in our cultural context in many, 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 many different modes of spirituality and religious belief from all corners of the world.
Yeah.
That monastic life is superior. If you're really good, obviously you're a monk. If you're not as qualified, not as good, you can still be a parent. Like, that is the most untrue statement ever. And yet it sits absolutely at the foundation of many of the world's spiritual paths. I feel like in my life also, in this lifetime, there was definitely, unquestionably, confusion about that subject. My teacher in India was a celibate monk, and he had superpowers. Like, okay, the most qualified being I'd ever met in yoga. No family, no responsibilities, wandering absolutely free, not even knowing where his next meal would come from. And he looked me deeply, profoundly straight in the eyes and said, monastic life, marriage, makes no difference. Doesn't matter either way. And it was just like, whoa. Like, that cultural assumption was so deep inside me that there was disbelief in that moment, even though I knew, like, this man does not mince words. Like, he is absolutely correct. But something inside, like the conditioned side of me, was like, is that really true? And, that's an assumption that needs to be deeply looked at. And it's an assumption that has caused humanity a tremendous amount of suffering. And we reap the rewards of that suffering even to this day. And we have to back up one half step and say that doesn't mean that there's something wrong with monastic life. Because like generally what happens with people is they realize, wait a minute, there's something that's not right in this assumption that one is superior. So we should just wipe out monastic life. Like, no, that's not
Flip around the
flip
superiority.
around the superiority complex, and like the parent should be on top of the building and the monk should be at the bottom of the building. It's like, no, nobody should be at the top of the building and nobody should be at the bottom of the building. Like, both are absolutely valid, beautiful, if they're right for you. Right? Neither one is better or worse. But like I said, that conditioning is so deep inside of us that even just that statement, which is actually pretty obvious, just like that one is not better than the other. It's like, whoa, like, how can you say that? Like, you know, like, so many spiritual traditions are built upon the fact that that's not true. It's like, okay, but let's look a little bit deeper. In the autobiography of a yogi, one of the kind of classic, most beautiful, most powerful spiritual texts of yoga, Yogananda himself was a renunciate. He was a monk. His own teacher was not. He was married and had children. His teacher's teacher, Lahiri Mahashaya, also not. Lahiri Mahashaya, not only was he married, and he had a job as a government accountant, and that marriage and that government accountancy lasted his whole life. Like he retired from that job quite old in his life. So here's one of the greatest mystics of the modern world. People from all over the world were coming to him for spiritual guidance. And he's married. And not only that, he's got an accounting job. What does it mean? Nothing. It doesn't mean anything either way. He also could have been a renunciate. Like,
What is at the root of this fear? Like, is it respect of the drawing force of sexual energy and the potential identification with it? Is this the root cause? Is the root cause to be busy with mundane activities that occupy too much space to include God
it's
in our life? Is it like it's not, there is a reason why
like,
people
we have to go very slow, because already you just unpacked two huge conceptual frameworks that are alive in our society to a astounding degree. So let's attempt to look at them one by one. You'll have to help me come back to the center of it. But let's start with the potency of sexual energy. Like, the potency of sexual energy, and that sexual energy is something that a lot of people enjoy, has nothing to do with, does that drive you toward delusion or does that drive you toward freedom? Just the same way that you can say intelligence itself, like in the autobiography of a yogi, Sri Yukteswar says, intelligence is a double-edged sword. It can cut you free from delusion, or it can bind you more fully in your own foolishness. That's not the exact words he used. I made up the end. But it's important to understand that principle, right? Which is that intelligence itself, which people put a lot of value on, right? It's like, oh wow, this is a really intelligent guy, this is a less intelligent guy, and I'm gonna gauge his position based on that. That can be used for your awakening or against your awakening.
Yeah.
And that's absolutely self-evident. Like if you meet a group full of intelligent people, you can discern very quickly that that's true. But I think that's equally true of the potential of sexual energy, right? It's like, can that be used as something that would bind two people in a very powerful, very beautiful way and uplift them spiritually? Unquestionably, the answer to that is yes, right? It's like, but you see many, many, many more examples of people suffering from it, right? It's like you see many more examples of the attachment and the desire and the unfulfilled desire and the, relationship that's not like coming into a harmonious relationship in that regard. And even very evolved people spiritually can still suffer that expression.
Yeah.
And so it's like, is there a potential for suffering on that side of the equation, on the side of that I'm making sexuality a conscious part of my spiritual life? Can that lead to suffering? Yes. Can that lead to upliftment? Yes. So it's just like the intelligence. It's like, can it free you? Yes. Can it bind you? Yes. Now let's look at the monastic side. Monastic life has many, 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 many benefits, actually. There's many beautiful, beautiful things about monastic life. Can that be used as a force for your freedom? Unquestionably, yes. Can that be used to bind you further in your egoic delusion? Unquestionably, yes. And if you don't believe that, you ought to read the accounts of some of the wrong uses of monastic life that have happened in this world. Like, can monastic life bring you to freedom? My own teacher was a monastic, and he was the highest quality spiritual being I ever met. Like, he is utterly qualified. Can monastic life bring you down into the egoic consciousness? Unquestionably, yes. And the place that makes it the most dangerous is my way is right.
Superiority.
It's like, I'm a monk. You better treat me with respect. Like, I'm up here and you're down there in the dirt of life. Huh? Like, I had association with my teacher in India for 12 years. He never once hinted that I was less than he was. In fact, the opposite. He was constantly reminding me that I was the same. To some extent, against my own will. Because I had the belief, hey, that's not true. Your way of life must be better than mine. Because look at the fruit of it. It's like, but that's not true. I sometimes say to our students on the deck, okay, let's make a little visualization. Buddha himself will come to the deck today. Buddha, the historical Buddha, is coming to the deck today. He's going to walk down those stairs and he's going to sit with us and he's going to give us a discourse. So here he is now. And he's very, very beautiful, you know. He's magnetic and handsome and has all the amazing qualities that the Buddha would have. And now he's sitting here and he's looking at everyone. And now he starts his discourse. And it starts out with the sentence, I, the great Buddha, have come to talk to you, lesser beings, that don't yet understand. Is that the Buddha?
Certainly not.
And every single one of us knows it. Right? Just like you hear that story, you say, that's not the Buddha.
Yeah.
How do you know? You just know
Yeah.
that that's not how an enlightened being would approach you.
Yeah.
You know, like in the cells of your DNA, practically, you know, because every single person, even if you're not Buddhist, you would say, no, that's not right. I don't know why I know that, but I just know that that's not right.
Yeah.
Say, okay, if that's not right, that means he would look upon you as though you and he were equal. Right? Like he wouldn't be coming from a place of I'm up here and you're down there. In fact, one of the great modern yogis said, people think it's that way, but it's the opposite. Like the ego is the wave that's rising up, trying to be the biggest wave in the room. And the sage is the ocean. Like he's not interested in being high or low. He doesn't care what anybody else in the room thinks about him. Like he knows that he's the ocean. And he knows that you're the ocean. And he will only treat you that way because he knows. But in the world, we're so accustomed to hierarchical structures, right? It's like we thrive on hierarchical structures, and we believe in the spiritual life, it must be the same. It must be that this person's up here and this person's down here, and monastic life is better or superior, and householder life is less superior. And it's like, just look at the autobiography of a yogi, that one of the great texts of yoga, and see if that's true. It's like 2 or 3 of the great sages of that book were householders. A few of them were monks. They don't make any differentiation at all. In fact, the one who wrote the book, who was a monk, would bow at his teacher's feet, who was a householder. Like, so is he bowing at the fact that he's a householder or a monk? He's bowing at the recognition that that being knows he's the ocean. And whether or not, what are the outward expression of that being's life, it's relatively unimportant, actually. But that's where we put all of our emphasis, right? We say, oh, this person is this way, he built that, or he did this, or she did that, or she is this kind of person. And it's like, that's not the quality that would qualify you spiritually, right? It's like, and that's a very confusing thing. Like, even my own teacher in India is like, he never had any organization. He didn't have hundreds of people that were following him around. Like, he was relatively unknown. And we, from the worldly perspective, would be like, that's a less qualified teacher than Yogananda, because Yogananda wrote a book and he had organizations and he had lots of people and he had huge influence. It's like, that's just not true. Like, it's not about how many followers that you have or how many students that you have or anything like that. It's about the recognition that's happened in your heart. And the challenging thing spiritually is it's very difficult to gauge the recognition that someone else has had in their heart. Like, it doesn't announce itself. Like, if you have an organization and a million people follow you, that announces itself. It's easy to see. But if you have the recognition in your heart of what is true, you can be totally unknown or known. So then what's the quality? What quality would allow you to recognize that? It's like, okay, you have to be subtle enough in the refinement of your own consciousness that you would see that that person recognizes. And yet, in some weird way, as mentioned in the Buddha story, we all do sort of recognize, right? It's like something inside of us knows, but that knowing is not about like the material conditions that life expressed.
I like very much how you brought into comparison the intelligence, not the intelligence, but human intelligence, mind, and the sexual energy. Both have huge potential for identification and binding, to bind us basically. Just, thinking of attending so many satsangs of people who just come up with their struggles of identification of mind. If there would be a solution such as celibacy for the mind, I think many people would try this option, just take this, put it somewhere, so I
Fun.
feel celibacy and monastic life is just an answer in a way, one answer, one approach to respond to this strong force.
Right. It's like we had this Zoom call about it in our advanced course recently, and I felt so touched and so grateful that we had a discussion there about it, and the discussion was somehow very beautiful and very intelligent. And I think what kind of can confuse, or what's easy to confuse, is intimacy and sexuality.
Right.
And a true monk is practicing profound intimacy with life. Profound. I told the story that my teacher in India, there's this celebration called Rakhi in India. And Rakhi, the sister ties something on the hand's brother as a sign that the brother is protecting the sister. He would tie Rakhis on trees. Like, you're my protector. Like, he had that kind of loving relationship with everything. And that included plants and trees and animals and stars and everything. It's like his intimacy was unmatched.
Yeah.
But he had chosen he had chosen as his life expression to let that intimacy fulfill what most people would want fulfilled in the sexual aspect of intimacy. And that's where it gets confusing, right? Because that's not a requirement.
Yeah.
It's like it
And
can
also
be,
not a guarantee either.
yeah, like it can be there, it cannot be there. And we tend to put all the emphasis on that moment, right? It's like, is it there or is it not there? Oh, that's the big one. You know, it's like, no, the big one is intimacy with life.
Yeah.
That's the big one. Whether or not that's choosing to express itself in sexual intimacy with someone can lead either towards freedom or towards delusion on both sides.
Yeah.
Like that's what we just talked about a minute ago, right? It's like you can be a monk and that can take you way further in your ego, or you can be a householder and that can take you further in your ego, or you can be a monk and that can take you toward freedom, or you can be a householder and that can take you toward freedom. So what rule would you like to make about that? Like it seems like in both conditions, things can go both ways. But the condition of intimacy with life is not that way, right? It's like if you are outside of intimacy with life, you're outside of spiritual truth.
Yeah.
Like, because intimacy is connectedness, right? It's like if it's my bubble, my coconut, and everything that's in my coconut is different than what's in your coconut. Like, whoa, you know? That's like you're in a profound state of delusion, actually, right? If there's an intimacy with life, that's okay. Life is expressing itself in all of these different varieties, and each one of them is part of me. Wow. So, okay, that's another dimension altogether. That would be paramount for both. Like if you've chosen a monastic life or you've chosen a householder life, the option of intimacy with life is not optional.
Yeah.
Like it's a requirement. The option of sexuality, that is negotiable. Like you can have it or not. And it can lead you toward freedom or away. It's, you know, and I feel like in our, one of the reasons why so much gets put on that is that in many societies, that delineation between what is intimacy and what is sexuality is absolutely unclear.
Yeah.
And if it's unclear, you just focus on the sex, right? Because that's pretty easy to identify. It's like, okay, this is a sexual experience. This is not a sexual experience. Okay, well, we'll look at did that person have sex or not? It's like, huh? Like that can bind you or not bind you on both sides. Like on the monastic side, on the householder side. If you look at that, it's telling you nothing. Like it's not telling you if that person's free or not free.
Yeah, I very recently read something that I found super sweet and inspiring. If you keep on falling in love with women,
Yeah.
you simply have to admit that your love is hormone driven. Like that's the state of your love. And that's where you are at, which is fine, but
Yeah.
just be clear on what it is.
Yeah. That's a very beautiful way of looking, right? And that's a package that I feel like, if you add that element in, that's a package that's even more confusing. Now you have intimacy, sexuality, and love. It's like, whoa, man, that's a cocktail. Like, and it should be a cocktail, just like you said, that's used for your own highest expression. But oftentimes, one part of that cocktail is misaligned in people in some way or another. That can be like the hormonal, that can be many different aspects. And, we all sort of know that too, right? It's like we all sort of know that it's not that hard for human beings to get misaligned in one of those things. And so we just kind of make the assumption that must be bad. But that's not a valid assumption. Because in many beings, those three things are aligned. And there's nothing wrong with that expression at all. It's just very pervasive in our world, in our society, that those things aren't aligned. And so we quickly just say, hey, that's obviously not aligned. It's like, well, most of the time, yes. But I actually feel like, and this is kind of getting a little bit maybe out of our topic, but I feel like the call of the moment in the world that we live in is for sacred relationship. Like if you look at what's vital for this planet at this moment, it's nurturing force of life, I mean. Like I don't mean that as being masculine or feminine. I mean like the soil depleting, the population declining. Like the nurturing aspect, the yin aspect of life that nourishes is underappreciated and undervalued. And if we go on that road, like that's crystal clear what happens down that road. Like that's a really ugly road to be going down. And yet it is the road that we go down.
Yeah.
So if that's the road that we go down, we need to rethink that. And one of the powerful ways of re-envisioning that is sacred relationship. Because inside every single one of us, individually, those forces should be balanced. That's like the basic tenet of subtle anatomy.
And that's where intimacy comes from.
Right. Say more about that.
Intimacy with life, the openness towards life, or even leaving that aside, openness towards life, just being the flow of life, has as a foundation, in my experience, an equilibrium, an energetic equilibrium, and the energetic equilibrium is the balance between the masculine and the feminine force within.
Yeah.
And when this comes to balance, can be established through different modalities, but if this comes to balance, I feel this is where boundaries drop, or where kind of the bubble pops. Like this is where life just is and flows from, the greatest to the smallest, like this experiential understanding of inclusiveness has as a basis an equilibrium,
Yeah.
an energetic equilibrium. in my experience. This is
Yeah.
um,
This is
yeah. What
very.
is intimacy? Intimacy. There's nothing dividing, like division, dissolving. That is intimacy, right? It's like not only proximity, but nothing dividing.
Mm. Mm.
And it is something very subtle. It is
Yeah.
something very internal. It is something very still and vast. It is something very natural.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I love your reflection there of, you know, internal alchemy resulting in natural intimacy. And I'm curious if maybe you can reflect a little bit on your own spiritual process in regards to motherhood. Like that for you ignited something.
Definitely motherhood, becoming a physical mother, I feel was absolutely an invitation to prove where I'm standing in a way. So it was basically, or still is, every day check in, how open, how centered am I, how identified, how closed am I. And I feel giving birth definitely invited sheddings of skin, of identification that I would say that for me personally, that's nothing I would generalize. That's a very personal experience that put spiritual aspirations, ideas, and longings onto 2 feet in a way.
Yeah.
That grounded, that that brought it really into everyday life, into every corner. Like spirituality and practice is not separate from life. Like life is the place in which life, I'm meaning now, like the conducting of everyday life requirements is the yoga mat,
Yeah.
is the meditation cushion. And I didn't know and expect how strong of an invitation birth and motherhood is to, yeah, to prove and to practice and to wake up.
Yeah. I mean, as you're speaking right there about motherhood is invitation to intimacy with life. And before we were talking about in our previous podcast about breath being life. It's like you have become that which breathes new life.
Yeah.
that's miraculous. Like, what? I mean, I feel like I always had a leaning as a human being towards the Divine Mother in some way. Maybe that has to do with my own internal alchemies. But I felt when I saw that express itself as a human experience, it was like it just doubled my respect. You know, it doubled my love and my gratitude. It's like, wow, that is the creation of life.
Yeah.
Like, you have taken, and you know that shouldn't be taken in a personal sense, right? Because
Yeah.
it's not personal.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it is that you became what breathes life,
Yeah.
and that's amazing.
Motherhood is definitely an invitation to servicefulness beyond, in my own individual experience of life, that is for sure different for other people, for other expressions here in life. But for me, it really opened the door to real servicefulness, to a servicefulness that is really coming from a place of inclusion, to extend yourself beyond only your physical body, your mind, your emotions, to really extend the notion of self to another life, and to put the other life in an even importance, or a higher importance, as it's just required for a baby, for a young child to grow. So much nurturing is just needed.
Yeah.
And to put that first, to put service first, without even any sense of giving, like a giving without even a sense of giving, because it is just the most natural doing, to be inclusive and to just prioritize correctly to the given needs, without differentiation of you and I. It's like a fusion, togetherness, and to this day I feel between Serena and I, there's a strong intimacy, there's a strong connection, there's a strong bond. And this experience of possibility of inclusiveness inspires inclusiveness beyond only mother-daughter relationship, but an inclusiveness that is more inclusive. But like it gives, like an experience is of course something different than a direct experience. Is something different than a mental assumption, an inspiration. A lived experience is trust building, beyond trust building in a sense of just verifying basically that inclusion is not only possible, but such a joyful and freeing and liberating and opening and softening experience, that this is just the direction I want to orientate my life towards and dedicate my life towards.
Mm.
So in this way, I feel motherhood, like in a nutshell, was very helpful for me to shed skin,
Yeah.
to be reborn into my capacity of inclusiveness and to verify that in the process, and through this verification, building trust that this is my possibility.
Mm.
Like, this is not an idea, this is not not out of reach.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's, I feel like, a possibility that, back to what we were talking about earlier, it's like that's a possibility that needs to be recognized perhaps on a broader scale.
Mm-hmm.
It's like in so much of your sharing, like nurturing aspect, inclusivity, it's like as the world kind of goes through depletion of its soil, depletion of its population, divided energetic structures, old energetic structures. I mean, I feel like many of those old energetic structures, they're just absolutely outworn.
Yeah.
Like they're just ready to fall, because they just don't serve what you're speaking about. It's like they no longer represent the reality, the potent reality of the vast majority of human experience, but they're they're holding on. It's like, but when I hear this conversation from your heart, it's like the days of those modes of reality are numbered, because that's not something that creates life. Like what we were sharing earlier, like that's a full death trip. You're going down the trip. Where does that lead? It's crystal clear where it leads, and it doesn't lead to life. It's like, can that be the fate of this beautiful project of human consciousness and human experience? It cannot be. Like, it will realign. Like the question is not will it realign, the question is how will it realign. I feel like we're at that point where it's like, okay, those old structures will collapse or are collapsing, depending on how you see it.
Yeah.
What will come in the wake of that? Like, I hope that it is the inner alchemy of internal balance that expresses itself as profound inclusiveness and the real experience of intimacy. Like I remember when Serena was a baby, Kirsten would say, sometimes she rolls over in the other room and I can feel that she rolled over. Whoa. Like, what a profoundly beautiful experience. Like, you could say almost that's like the pinnacle of the intimacy topic, right? It's like I'm so profoundly connected. Without even seeing, I know what is the experience of this being.
Yeah, it is what just comes to my mind about intimacy and inclusion. Like when I bring Serena to bed, every night when she's about to fall asleep, I enter together with her into the sleep state while being in the waking state. And as I dive with her in the sleep state, um, at one point there's always a recognition that it's not my sleep state actually, but it's her sleep state that I enter with her. So like even on this state of where we are in wakefulness and dream state, like there's a profound connection how we can or how we move together.
Yeah.
And I'm surprised Serena is so young, but she already can read my mind sometimes.
Yeah.
That I'm really surprised, but also it's natural.
It's natural. It's totally natural.
If one is in such connection, of course.
Yeah. Yeah.
We know. Of course we know.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is probably going to be maybe something strange to say, but I used to do the same thing with you.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I wanted to say that next, that we practice that together as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And what a beautiful I think this is most people, the full extent of their life that they live is only the waking state. That's a fraction of your life. Like, that's a fraction of your life. But you think that's the whole story, And I think that in a weird way, that points to where we started at the beginning of our podcast today, right? It's like, does this person have a sexual relationship or not? That's got to be the full story. That's a fraction of the story. Like, it's not even that interesting a part of the story.
Yeah. And I feel like this whole, I don't know if it's a fear or just objection that family life and spiritual life would contradict one another, or that family life would bind into the worldly and take away from the divine experience, just by not being able to sit in the corner on your meditation cushion for 5 hours every day because you're busy with your child. It's not true.
No.
Like, you are meditating in a way in your action, and you're really called to be in your center.
Yeah.
Sitting in your corner, you can be off center with no feedback.
Definitely.
Like, if your child is in a tantrum and you're not in your meditation, this is not good.
Yeah.
For the whole situation.
Yeah.
So kind of it is really a call to practice. You are practicing so much, and I feel the feedback of not being in practice is just coming at such a high cost, because it's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
Just thinking of, moments when I would lose it, basically, not respond appropriately, but like shut down or create separation out of uncenteredness. It breaks my heart.
Yeah.
And that's such a high cost.
Yeah.
That kind of, it's a bit the Zen stick, right? The broken heart. When you get out of your centeredness, so that, I feel in my case, that might be really different for others. But in my case, motherhood, family life, life with you is a total integration of life into spirituality and infuses life
Yeah.
completely with spirituality, with
Yeah.
spirit,
Yeah.
so that I would personally draw the conclusion for my very personal situation or circumstance that it was sparking
Mm.
my opening.
Yeah. 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 A pathway to further awakening and deepening in your own heart's knowing. You know, the whole science of yoga came from Shiva, the Adi yogi, the first of the yogis. And his first disciples were the rishis and the Saptarishis. And every single one of them was married. And one time, my teacher in India was in his beautiful offering saying, celibate or not celibate makes no difference. Then he said with great power, the rishis themselves were married. Like the greatest mystical seers of all time. They were married. Like, it doesn't, you know, it doesn't say anything either way. But it's beautiful to have a testimony and powerful to have a testimony of someone who can say from their own experience, this deepened my trust. This deepened my connection. This deepened my intimacy and profound experience of the unity of life. Say, wow, what a beautiful offering. You know, because it's, in a weird way, motherhood is just like sexuality that we were talking about earlier. It's like, can that take you to freedom? Yes. Can that take you to delusion? Yes, definitely. Can go either way. And so having the testimony of someone who can say, no, this was a powerful part of my spiritual awakening, I feel like it's a voice that we need to hear more.
Yeah, it's breaking many, many concepts
Mm.
and ideas and identifications and
Yeah.
constantly inspires opening.
Mm. Mm. Yeah. The I want to put one more very challenging teaching that my own teacher in India taught me forth. He said the way that you treat, well, he was speaking specifically to me, but you could broaden it out. But let me start with the words that he actually said. He said, the way that you love your wife is the way that you love the Divine Mother. It's a very strong statement. And, you know, the opposite or whatever variation is there in it is equally true.
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's fully landed.
Yeah, it's and I feel like, that statement right there, it should not be challenging, actually. It should just be obvious.
Yeah.
Like, it shouldn't be like, whoa, like, that's such a challenging teaching. It should be like, yeah, like, that's obvious. But in the way that we live in this world, it's not obvious. And that's because of what we were talking about earlier. It's like intimacy, sexuality, love as a cocktail. Like, it can just go quickly into something that's not the expression that was just shared. And because of that, it's like not understood or respected or trusted the simple statement, how you love your wife is how you love the mother of the universe. Like, can that be like integrated into your experience? Or let me say, when that becomes a commonplace and not an aspiration of like, wow, that's a long way from where I am, but no, that's just obvious that it's that way, we will be in the world that I spoke of earlier.
That's sacred relationship.
Yeah, we will be in the realm of sacred relationship without having to move.
Yeah.
Like, when you can say that, you're on absolutely beautiful ground of unity. But there's not so many examples of that. Thank you,
I
love.
just love our podcast. I love talking to you. I love exchanging. I love the space.
Very grateful.
Thank you.
Thank you, love.
This was Wisdom and Motion with the Akasha family today. Keep on shining in the spirit of yoga.